What is an emergency fund? Where should I keep it? How much do I put in it? Should I invest it? Let's talk about it. Hi, I'm Alison. I'm a theater artist and avid budgeter, and on this channel I talk about budgeting, side hustles, day jobs, personal finance, so that you can live a financially healthy life while still pursuing your creative passions. If that sounds good to you, make sure to subscribe down below and hit the notification bell if you'd like to be notified whenever I post. Today I'm going to be talking about the savings account you need, an emergency fund. First, I'm going to talk about what an emergency fund is and why you should have one and how much you should put in it. Then I'm going to talk about where you should keep it and whether or not you should invest it. So, what is an emergency fund? An emergency fund is a savings account where it's recommended you keep at least 3 to 6 months of your basic living expenses in case of an emergency. Why should you have one? Basically, this is your financial safety net, so that when something bad or just unexpected inevitably happens, you don't have to go into any more debt or rely on any investments to cover that expense. Now, depending on you and your financial situation, 3 to 6 months of basic living expenses might not be your ideal amount. For example, if you're a freelancer or someone with a less stable income, you might want to have a slightly larger emergency fund of 9 to 12 months. Now, do I do this? No. For me, I have 4 months of basic living expenses in my emergency fund. This is what feels good for me. I prefer to just keep it at 4 months and to put all my other money into investments. But it's important to keep in mind that I don't have any kids, I don't have a car, I don't have a mortgage. My emergency fund is pretty much just for me and my cat. Now, there are also people who choose to save a smaller emergency fund at first before aggressively tackling any high-interest debt, such as student loans or credit card debt. If this is your situation, you may have heard from the ever-famous Dave Ramsey that you should save $1,000 as your baby emergency fund and then throw all your money towards all of your debt. Honestly, though, if you're considering this, I would strongly urge you to sit down and calculate how far $1,000 would actually go in the event of an emergency. For example, if you lost your job and you suddenly had to cover a month's worth of your expenses, would $1,000 cover that? Probably not. If you got in a car accident, would $1,000 cover all of your medical expenses and your car expenses? Probably not. Do you have pets? Do you have kids? Do you have a home that could suffer any damage? Do you have anyone or anything basically that could get into an emergency for which you would be financially responsible? Look, it's not fun to sit down and think about everything that could go wrong, or I don't know, maybe it is for you, I don't know your life. But honestly, this is how you come up with the number that is right for you. For example, Asia Dang, who's this huge YouTuber, and she paid off I think over $200,000 in debt in like 2 years. She has a video where she talks about her baby emergency fund she decided to save before tackling her debt. For her, that was $5,000 because her dogs had previously gotten in emergencies that she had to cover, and that cost about $5,000. So she used that as kind of like a guide point, knowing that if something happened to her dogs again, it could cost $5,000 and she would want to be able to cover that. So to figure out what number is right for you and how much you should put in your emergency fund, you need to sit down and calculate your basic monthly living expenses. These are things like rent, mortgage, any bills and utilities, any necessary medical costs like monthly medications that you need to take, any minimum debt payments, and groceries. Then once you have that number of your 1 month of basic living expenses, you should multiply it by 3 to 6, whatever you're comfortable with, or maybe it's more, maybe it's slightly less, but multiply that number, figure out your total number for your total emergency fund that you want, and then start putting away money each month until you reach your goal. So I'm really curious because I like to talk about money. Now that you've calculated this, hopefully along with this video, what do you think is a good amount of money to have in your emergency fund? Let me know in the comments below. Like I said, for me, 4 months really seems to be that sweet spot. So you know how much you want to put in your emergency fund, but where should you keep it and should you be investing it? First of all, no, you should not be investing your emergency fund. An emergency fund is for emergencies. I used the example of 2020 in my last video, so I'm gonna link that here. But basically, the stock market is extremely volatile. You do not want your emergency fund to be in the stock market because if it's going through a major crash, then your emergency fund might actually be smaller than it would have been if you had kept it in cash. Or at least you would be withdrawing it and losing out on all those gains. So what's the point of investing it anyway? The whole point of an emergency fund is so that you don't have to go into any more debt and so that you don't have to withdraw from any investments and diminish your growth in the stock market. Let your emergency fund be your emergency fund and let your investments be your investments and let them ride out that wild roller coaster that is the stock market. So I personally recommend putting your emergency fund in a high yield savings account. You know your girl loves a good high yield savings account. Anyway, there are 2 reasons for this. If you're one of those people who's like, oh, I want to be investing my emergency fund so that because I'm losing out on all this growth and stuff, well, an HYSA is pretty much like the safest way that you can keep that emergency fund in easily accessible liquid cash and still earn money on it. I calculated this and actually made a post on my Instagram about how much money you would earn by keeping your savings in an HYSA versus a regular schmegular savings account. Let's say your emergency fund is $5,000. By keeping it in an HYSA with a 0.5% APY, you're gonna earn over $25 in interest per year just by keeping your savings there. If you were keeping it in a regular old savings account with a 0.01% APY, that's also probably doing some other like sketchy things like charging like maintenance fees and low balance fees, then you're only going to earn 50 cents in a year by keeping your money in that bank. So an HYSA will earn you like 50 times more money just by keeping it in that account. And if the APYs of high yield savings accounts go back to what they were at the beginning of 2020, which for me was 2.5% APY, by keeping $5,000 in a high yield savings account, you're going to make over $125 just by keeping your money in a high yield savings account. That's like 25 cold brews or 8 really amazing, delicious burgers. Just saying. The second reason to keep your emergency fund in a high yield savings account is because high yield savings accounts are typically like only savings accounts that are online. So it will be completely separate from your checking account. So if you're one of those people who checks their checking account to see how much money they have left to spend before their next paycheck, then you're not even going to see your emergency fund. You're gonna have no temptation to transfer that over to your checkings to spend on shopping or going out, buying cold brews, eating a good burger. You get the point. Out of sight, out of mind. So now you know what an emergency fund is, why you need one, not to invest it, and why you should consider putting it in a high yield savings account. The last thing I want to make clear is that saving for an emergency fund is really the first step to becoming financially stable and healthy. It's really important to do this before you start doing other things like aggressively paying off debt or investing for retirement. As a freelance theater artist and online teacher, and someone who used to work in the travel industry before 2020, I really know the value of an emergency fund, and the idea of not having one genuinely gives me anxiety. If you've never made a budget before and you have no idea how you're even going to start saving for an emergency fund, I want to tell you it's totally possible. Check out my first video where I walk you through step by step how to actually start tracking your spending and create a budget so that you can start budgeting for savings and start working towards that emergency fund. I also have a free spending tracker to help you get started with this, which I'll link down below. And in my next video, I'm going to be talking about all of my personal tips and tricks to save for an emergency fund and all of my savings and retirement accounts as a freelance artist who has never had an income that has exceeded $30,000. If this video was helpful to you, then please let me know by giving it a thumbs up and commenting down below. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.